Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. We really appreciate your patience as we struggled to get logged in this morning to the webinar. Welcome to April's Advocacy Update with Justin and me, and we'd like to give you some relatively good news in reference to the PRC and its funding. So today's agenda will review March assignments. We'll talk about PRC Center funding update, and we'll also go over some activities that you can do in April to advance and continue to support the PRC funding especially. So today's agenda, well, just to go over March assignments, we had you contact your legislators to continue support of an increase of $1 million for the FY18 Omnibus. And if you recall, Justin will review this today because it's been a while since we went over the appropriations process and what's been happening. But we really had some good results there, and we'll talk about how your advocacy efforts were very helpful in ensuring that we had an increase. We're always looking for new advocates and regional champions, and I've heard from some of you encouraging some of your friends and caregivers, providers, and other individuals around in your community who might be interested in being part of our Reeve family. So please continue to send me those names. And finally, we'll give an update on HR 620 and what hopefully will not be happening in the Senate regarding to that piece of legislation. So I think we can get started. Yep. So Justin, if you could really lead the webinar today around HR 620, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Kim, and thanks everybody for being on the call or watching the recording. We appreciate it. So as Kim mentioned, we had talked last month about HR 620. Just as a reminder, this is a bill that has now passed the House, and this bill would revamp the Americans with Disabilities Act to make it considerably harder to take action against businesses and facilities and buildings that are violating the ADA. As of now, it's basically on the facility to know the ins and outs of ADA law and to make sure they're compliant. The bill passed by the House would put the onus of knowing ADA law on the person who is in the wheelchair or has the disability. It was a bad bill all around, very fought against by the disability community as it was going through the House. It did ultimately pass and now awaits action in the Senate. The first thing I should say is that normally, and I think I said this last month, when a bill is passed by the House and goes to the Senate, it's immediately assigned to a committee so that the Senate can start work on it, or at least get it prepared to start work. The Senate has still not assigned that bill to a committee, which is a very good sign that they are not planning to take action on that bill. Just in case, many senators were not going to sit around and wait for it to be assigned to a committee. Senator Casey from Pennsylvania, who is a staunch defender of disability rights and a great advocate for all of us in the Senate, spearheaded a letter, and some of the language from that letter, this is not the entire letter, this is just a key paragraph from that letter, is on your screen, and I think it probably says everything that you need to know about Senator Casey's letter. It's aimed at Senate leadership, Mitch McConnell specifically, saying this is a bad bill, let's not bring this to the floor, let's not do anything that would infringe on disability rights. This was signed by 42 senators, mainly Democrats, but there are, Bernie Sanders is an independent. What's interesting is even in meetings with staff of conservative senators, and actually we had one meeting with a conservative senator himself, John Boozman of Montana, basically said, I'm sorry, not of Montana, of Arkansas, who said there's really no appetite for bringing this bill up. They don't want to wade into this kind of fight, especially, they didn't say this, but you can infer that we're getting closer and closer to election season, and there's no reason to start passing legislation that certainly is as controversial as this legislation is prior to, in an election year. So we remain vigilant, of course, and things can happen quickly in the Senate, but again, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of appetite to move this further. But, in general, as we said last month, the fact that it even passed the House just kind of is a microcosm of a larger effort we feel to chip away at disability rights in Congress and in this administration, and it's troubling. So we're keeping an eye on all of it, keeping an eye on this bill specifically, and we'll let you know if actions are warranted. Moving to the Administration for Community Living and the Paralysis Resource Center. So a very brief reminder, the Reeve Foundation gets federal money to run the Paralysis Resource Center through a competitive grant. administered by the Administration for Community Living. We are in the process of reapplying for that grant right now, actually. So we've gotten it every year since 2002, but the money has to be there. We were zeroed out in the President's budget, as we were last year, for FY19, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. ACL, and again, this is, if you were on last month's call, this is more of a refresher. ACL is attempting to do something a little bit different, and the good news is this slide is now a bit outdated. So the National Paralysis Resource Center is what Reeve gets their money for, and this is their announcement. Again, we're applying for that grant right now. You'll see that box in the lower right corner that says the estimated total funding is, I think it's $5.4 million. That is actually now inaccurate, and I will go forward and tell you why, and we'll come back to this. The Omnibus passed in the House and the Senate. It was signed by the President. So Congress could not get their fiscal year 2018 funding done by the end of fiscal year 2017, which was September 30th. Another way of saying that, we've been in FY18 since October 1st of last year, but they finally just got the funding done late last month, just because, well, it takes a lot to get those appropriations bills done. There's 12 of them, always differences in the House and the Senate. So it's a long, arduous process, and sometimes it takes a long time to get to the finish line. We were finally able to get there on March 23rd with good news and bad news. The good news is there was $1 million increase in the budget, in the Omnibus, for a Paralysis Resource Center. And if you read the wording on this, it's an increase of $1 million, and then the last sentence is the one I want you to pay attention to. It says, this agreement directs ACL to continue support for the national PRC, which is to say the Reeve PRC, at not less than the fiscal year 2017 funding level. So that's $6.7 million. So they increased the funding for the Paralysis Resource Center by $1 million, but only directed ACL to give 6.7 of that to the Reeve, the National Paralysis Resource Center. As a result, as I said, this slide is now outdated. Where it says estimated total program funding, it is now just about $6.7 million. It's a little short because ACL keeps some of that money for overhead and admin costs and things like that. So the ACL listened to that directive by Congress, and they have upped the overall award, which is great news. It's more money for the PRC. The downside is, again, there is $1 million for a state pilot program. And if you want to know more about the ins and outs of this, we talked about it on last month's webinar, which you can watch. The long and short of it is this state-level pilot, which what ACL is calling it, would serve to give small, not small, $200,000 grants to as many as 5 different entities to re-grant to organizations that are doing work on behalf of people with mobility impairments in the states. That is work that is already being done by the national PRC. We give away quality of life grants. We've given just about $22 million worth, almost 3,000 grants in all 50 states. ACL has not been able to provide a good answer on the utility of this state pilot, what it's going to do different, why it's necessary, which states they're looking at. This, in our opinion, is duplicative and unnecessary, and will take money that should be going to those programs and putting them into administrative overhead, things like that, that are unnecessary. So we are still actively trying to fight against this pilot program in any way that we can, bringing congressional pressure on ACL and trying to defund it in FY19. So that is where we are with FY18. It has just concluded with overall good news, $1 million increase, but again, with $1 million not being specifically directed by Congress, but it's clear the implication is that it will probably go to that state pilot program. I will pause there and ask if anyone wants to weigh in with any questions on the phone or over the chat box in the lower left corner of your screen. I'm happy to answer any questions on that before we get to FY19.
Ladies and gentlemen on the phone lines, if you have a question, please press star 1.
Hearing none, we will move on to fiscal year 2019.
Justin, may I just add one thing?
Please.
I just wanted to acknowledge our regional champions.
Yes,
because Justin and I heard from senior appropriations staff that we've done a really good job with getting not only Democrat support but continued Republican support for the program, and we were really commended for our efforts, and we really have to acknowledge our regional champions for those efforts, so thank you.
Yes, absolutely. That was it was a great grassroots push, and we really appreciate everyone reaching out to get that across the finish line, and hopefully you'll still be with us in FY 2019 as we continue the grassroots push. So that brings us to fiscal year 2019. As I said, this is the President's budget, and our section in the President's budget, it says that it thinks those programs can be carried out by other existing funding streams. Again, I did this on the last webinar, but I'll point it out again. The last sentence of this justification to remove funding from the PRC says, it provides resources where they want to put the money, provides resources to people with all types of significant disabilities. As I think everyone on this call knows, the PRC serves people with mobility impairments specifically. It's going to be much more difficult to go to another governmental entity or whoever they give this money to who focuses on a broad range of significant disabilities. They won't have the expertise and the years of institutional knowledge that the PRC has to focus on people with mobility impairments. So it's vitally important that the PRC continues. Luckily, Congress has always acknowledged, since its inception, the importance of the PRC, and we have a lot of champions. Representative Jen Langevin from Rhode Island and Leonard Lance from New Jersey sent a letter which garnered 11 bipartisan signatures to congressional leadership praising the PRC. This letter asks for you'll see if you can read the fine print, it asks for an increase of $1 million to $7.7 million. We've already gotten that, so that's good news, and so essentially this is asking for level funding. Again, 11 bipartisan signatures, so good news on behalf of the House. Most of the work in the House is done. They've got their appropriations requests in. They know what we want. Work is still ongoing in the Senate. So this is actually, because things have been happening a lot this week, the strategy is the same. Senator Baldwin, who is our biggest champion, Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin, who sits on the Senate Appropriations Committee, will submit language tomorrow, actually, calling for another increase to the Paralysis Resource Center. And I added the language there, but this is actually outdated. So it will say, the beginning is right, it will say the committee includes $8.7 million for the National PRC, an increase of $1 million. That will stand. The last sentence will be slightly different. It will say the committee directs ACL to continue support for the National PRC at not less than $7.7 million. In other words, we don't want ACL to find any way to not give us a full $7.7 million, which will result in an actual increase of $1 million. So there was a $1 million increase in the Omnibus, but none of that actually went to the National PRC. We got level funded, which is great, because it could have been, without that, a cut of $1 million. So we level funded, but now we really want that increase. So Senator Baldwin's staff is strategizing to ensure that we get a full $7.7 million, whether that is another increase of $1 million, and again, $1 million would probably go to that state pilot, and then the National PRC would still get $1 million, or the wording is such that if we don't get an overall increase, in other words, if we stay at $7.7 million, this language would still say that the National PRC gets $7.7 million, meaning that ACL would not have any money to fund that state pilot program. So one way or the other, Senator Baldwin's staff wants to ensure that our PRC, the National PRC, gets $7.7 million. A little bit of backroom dealing and a little bit of language for sure, but that's the way the Senate works. And we are hopeful that because we have numerous champions, and Kim and I and other folks have been on the Hill a lot, talking to more people, garnering new champions in the Senate, we're pretty confident that we'll be able to get this across the finish line. Now, that said, it is shaping up to be another bit of another weird year in terms of appropriations. As everyone knows, Paul Ryan just announced his retirement. He will probably not be as much of a whip cracker in terms of trying to get appropriations done on time, not that it's worked in the past. But all of that and an election year means that we are probably going to have a very, very slow appropriation season. This is the time of year where organizations like us lay the groundwork, we get our language done, we submit testimony to congressional hearings, things like that. What follows that is usually a very long waiting period to see what the actual bill language is and what the schedule looks like. That is very, very unclear right now. There hasn't been, other than scheduling hearings to talk about appropriations. There hasn't been a lot of effort to actually write bills, anything like that yet. So it could be a long slog through the end of the fiscal year to see if anything actually gets done. So we will update you next month for sure in terms of where we are, but know that we have submitted language. It's good language. We've got congressional champions behind us. We've done everything we can do at this point, and the rest is sort of a wait and see. So I know that's a bit of a complicated situation with the Paralysis Resource Center. Again, we are in the midst of submitting our application, which I'm told is very, very good and very, very strong. We have run the PRC since 2002. We are, and I'm not just saying this because of my affiliation with the foundation. It is a fact that we are most capable of running the PRC as we have. Nobody could take it over and do the job we do, and we're confident that ACL will see that. Any other questions before we move on to April assignments? Hearing none, we will go over to April assignments. Again, there is an alert up now on the Reeve Advocacy webpage asking for you to support a $1 million increase for FY19. That language, if you've sent a letter already, that language has probably changed based on the omnibus that passed at the end of March. So by all means, go in, update it, use the updated language, and send another letter to senators specifically asking for that $1 million increase. And again, it's always helpful if you can find other people that you work with, that you are in social media circles, anything like that, to become regional champions. We greatly appreciate the work that all of you do, and there is strength in numbers. The more that we can get on board, the stronger we are as a group. So by all means, if you know anyone who wants to join us, please make them aware of the program and the work that we're doing. It would be greatly appreciated. And with that, I will once more open it up to questions and comments. I realize this was a short run-through, but Congress, I will say Congress was out for 2 weeks for the Easter break, so there was some legislative break, but obviously a lot going on with our appropriations work. Questions, comments before we sign off?
And while people are thinking of questions, I just also wanted to add several of you have had the opportunity to meet with your congressional representatives, including your Senate offices in the district. And obviously we just passed a recess, but if you're interested in that, please contact me and I can help you coordinate those meetings for the next time that your members, or even meet with staff in the district. It's been really successful, and as a result of some of those meetings, we were able to get signatures on that letter that Justin reviewed from Representative Langevin's submission on the House side. So we really want to thank you for that, and building those relationships take time but are really worth it. So if you're interested, please don't forget to contact me around that. We'll send an update, follow-up email with a recording as well as a link to the alert. And again, we're always here to answer any questions. I don't think I see any.
Nope, not seeing any questions. With that, we again apologize for the delayed start and appreciate everybody's patience while we figured out our own issues. And appreciate everybody listening in today. And again, if you're watching the recording, we appreciate that as well. And reach out with any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes today's call. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.